License, registration, or just some good excuses, old man? That's what the young officer sneered as he circled the rusted pickup, chuckling with his partner. The driver didn't argue, didn't even look up. He just kept both hands on the wheel, steady, silent, and scarred. An hour later, a black SUV pulled up, and when the four-star general stepped out, he didn't salute. He pointed at the officers and said 6 words. "You just stopped the man who trained me. If that hit you deep, comment respect for every quiet legend still walking among us." Harold Briggs, 82, was heading home from the hardware store. His old Chevy truck rattled with every turn, but it ran, because he built it himself. He wore a faded flannel jeans and a cap with worn embroidery. U.S. Army, Special Forces. No one ever noticed him, and that's how he liked it. That morning, he'd bought parts to fix a neighbor's wheelchair ramp. No charge. A mile from home, red and blue lights flashed behind him. He pulled over calmly, hands on the wheel. 2 young officers approached, one tapping the hood. No plates, no tags, driving a pile of junk. The other smirked. Probably unregistered or stolen. What do you think, old man? Harold replied softly, "It's mine, since 1968. Got ID?" He handed it over. They scoffed. "Retired? Yeah, sure, sit tight." They pulled him out. One laughed. "You sure you're not hauling moonshine in that thing?" Harold said nothing. The officers circled his truck, running their fingers over the dents and rust. Each mark told a story they couldn't read. Afghanistan, 1978. Colombia, 1983. Places that didn't officially exist on any deployment roster. "Step over here, sir," one said, the word sir dripping with mockery. Harold complied. His movements were measured, deliberate. Years of combat had taught him that resistance often escalated situations unnecessarily. Besides, he had nowhere pressing to be. "What's in the back?" The taller officer gestured toward the lumber and hardware supplies. "Wheelchair ramp materials. For Mrs. Clancy down the street." "Sure it is." The officer laughed, sharing a knowing look with his partner. Harold's weathered hands bore the calluses of a man who'd built and rebuilt more than just trucks. They'd constructed field hospitals under enemy fire, emergency shelters during floods, and yes, dozens of ramps for veterans who couldn't navigate their own porches. The sun beat down as they made him empty his pockets. Keys, wallet, a worn photo, a small notebook filled with names, some with stars beside them, some crossed out entirely. "What's this, some kind of code?" The officer flipped through the notebook. Harold simply said, "Names of men I served with." The officer tossed it back to him carelessly. "Well, your truck's not road legal, that's for sure." Harold caught the notebook gently, tucking it back into his pocket with the reverence of a chaplain handling scripture. He didn't correct them, didn't explain that his vehicle had a special historical vehicle designation that exempted it from certain regulations. He just stood there, straight-backed, patient, silent. They made him sit on the curb. People drove by, phones recorded. One officer said, "He's being uncooperative." The other added, "Might be a risk." They called it in. Possible stolen vehicle, elderly male, uncooperative tone. Harold just stared at the horizon. In his pocket was a folded letter, a retirement note signed by the Army Chief of Staff. In the glove box, a Bronze Star certificate and photo of a unit he once commanded. "This is protocol," they told him. "You understand." Why, no, he didn't reply. After 30 minutes, one of them kicked a tire and muttered, "Bet this guy thinks he's Rambo." A passing teenager snickered, taking a selfie with Harold in the background. "Grandpa's in trouble," he captioned it, uploading to social media without a second thought. "Should we check his meds?" the younger officer joked. "Maybe he's forgotten who he is." Harold's silence was mistaken for confusion rather than what it truly was. The practiced patience of a man who had endured interrogations by experts far more intimidating than 2 local officers. An older gas station clerk nearby recognized Harold. Quietly called someone, "You're not going to believe who they've got on the ground right now." 40 minutes passed. The officers laughed, sipped coffee. One sat on the hood. At minute 59, the wind shifted. A black SUV turned the corner. Government plates, tinted windows. It rolled to a stop. Both officers stood, the back door open, and a tall man in full four-star general uniform stepped out. "Which of you stopped this man?" The midday heat rippled off the asphalt as Harold sat, his shadow barely offering relief. The officers had positioned themselves under a nearby tree, their cruiser's air conditioning running periodically when they climbed in to check records. A small crowd had gathered across the street. Whispers circulated. Most assumed Harold was just another troublemaker, perhaps suffering from dementia or confusion. Few noticed how perfectly still he sat, how measured his breathing remained. The posture of a man who had once waited 72 hours in jungle mud for an extraction team. "Think we should call social services?" the younger officer asked, loud enough for Harold to hear. "Nah, probably has family somewhere. Once we verify the vehicle status, we'll figure it out," his partner replied. Harold's thoughts drifted to similar roads, dusty pathways in Vietnam where young men with rifles and little training had stopped him. Those encounters had ended differently. Their respect was often the difference between life and death. A woman approached the officers. "Excuse me, that's Harold Briggs. He builds ramps for disabled veterans in our community." "Ma'am, please step back. This is police business," the officer responded dismissively. "But he's a decorated veteran. Everyone knows him around here." "We're doing our job, ma'am. Please return to your vehicle." She walked away, shaking her head. Harold's knees ached from the concrete, but he wouldn't show it. Wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him uncomfortable. He'd endured far worse. Tropical diseases, shrapnel wounds, 36 hours in a flooded cave during monsoon season. The gas station clerk, Mike Henderson, former Army himself, had recognized Harold immediately. Mike had attended the VFW meetings where Harold rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. Mike knew exactly who to call. "General Phillips, it's Mike from Riverside Gas. Sir, they have got Harold Briggs sitting on the curb like a criminal." "Yes, sir, we saw a corner of Maple and Pine." "Yes, sir, the same Harold Briggs." The officers grew bored with their catch. The computer showed no wants or warrants. The vehicle wasn't reported stolen, just an old man with an unregistered truck. "Let's wrap this up," the senior officer said. "Write him for expired registration, improper display of plates, an unsafe vehicle." 3 tickets? That'll cost him nearly $1,000. Rules are rules. They approached Harold with clipboards in hand, ready to deliver their bureaucratic punishment, when the unmistakable sound of heavy tires on asphalt turned heads. The black SUV didn't creep into position. It arrived with purpose. Government plates, military driver. The officers exchanged glances. "Federal?" one whispered. "Maybe FBI?" Neither guessed correctly. Silence. One officer stammered, "We were just—" The general raised a hand. "That man, Harold Briggs, taught me how to lead." "Sir?" "At Fort Bragg, 1983. He ran recon, saved my entire squad in training when we lost signal in the swamp." The general's aide stepped forward, carrying a leather portfolio embossed with the presidential seal. He stood at perfect attention beside his superior officer. The crowd had grown, drawn by the unexpected appearance of military brass in their small town. Cell phones recorded everything. A retired mail carrier whispered to his wife, "That's why I always left extra stamps for Mr. Briggs." One officer blinked. "We didn't know. You didn't ask." The general walked to Harold. "Permission to help you up, Sergeant Major?" Harold stood without help. Permission granted. On cameras now recorded in silence. The general turned to the officers. "You just disrespected a man with 3 combat tours and 40 years of service. This truck? It's part of Army history. So is he." The general faced the growing crowd. "This is what happens when we stop teaching respect." A young girl nearby whispered to her mom, "Is he famous?" "No, honey," she replied. "He's more than that. He's real." One of the officers removed his sunglasses. "Sir, we're sorry." Harold simply said, "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the next old man before you assume he's nothing." The general saluted him. Harold returned it. General Phillips stood ramrod straight, his 4 stars catching the sunlight. The crowd had fallen completely silent, even children sensing the gravity of the moment. Sergeant Major Briggs led the operation that extracted 23 hostages from the Colombian jungle in '86. The general continued, his voice carrying across the gathering. He returned to active duty at age 60 after 9/11 to train special operations units in advanced survival techniques. 3 presidents have shaken his hand. His mission records will remain classified until 2075. The techniques he developed for high-altitude rescues saved 18 airmen during a classified operation I'm not at liberty to name, even now. A woman in nurse's scrubs approached the edge of the crowd. Mr. Briggs donated blood every month for 30 years, she added, never missed an appointment. The officers looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot. The truck you're ticketing? General Phillips gestured to the rusted Chevy. It transported medical supplies during Hurricane Andrew in '92. Harold drove it through 4 feet of water to reach stranded families. The older officer cleared his throat. Sir, we were just following protocol for vehicles without proper... Protocol? The general's voice sharpened. Protocol is built on judgment, officer. Harold Briggs wrote the protocol for night extractions that's still used by our forces today. Harold remained expressionless, his weathered face betraying nothing. But for those who knew him, the slight straightening of his shoulders spoke volumes. A woman pushed forward from the crowd. That's the man who built my husband's wheelchair ramp after his stroke, she announced. Wouldn't take a dime for it. Another voice called out, he taught my son's scout troop wilderness survival last summer. He delivers groceries to the senior center every Wednesday, added an elderly man with a cane. General Phillips nodded. Not surprised. Sergeant Major Briggs never stopped serving, did he? The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people now, many filming with phones. The story was already spreading through social media. 4-star general defends elderly vet harassed by police. The younger officer, face flushed with embarrassment, approached Harold. Sir, I want to apologize personally for my disrespect. I had no idea, Harold interrupted gently. That's the point, son. You never know who someone is by looking at them. That's why respect comes first, not last. The general produced a file from his aide and handed it to the senior officer. This is Sergeant Major Briggs's service record. The unclassified version, anyway. I suggest you both read it before your shift ends today. The officer accepted it with a chastened nod. As for the truck, General Phillips continued, it has historical vehicle status granted by the Department of Defense. The paperwork is filed with your department annually. Perhaps you should check records more thoroughly next time. Harold finally spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. General, these officers were doing their job as they understood it. The fault isn't entirely theirs. Explain, Sergeant Major. We've created a system where badges and uniforms matter more than the people wearing them, where protocols replace judgment. I saw the same mistake in Vietnam, young men following orders without context. The general nodded slowly. Always the teacher, aren't you, Harold? For the first time, Harold smiled slightly. Until they put me in the ground, sir. That afternoon, the sheriff's department issued a public statement. The incident made national news. Legendary veteran detained, General defends former mentor. The mayor of the town declared June 4th as Harold Briggs Day. Donations flooded in from across the country, $247,000 within the first week. Harold directed every penny toward building wheelchair ramps for disabled veterans nationwide. The Harold Briggs Initiative was established with a waiting list of over 300 homes needing accessibility modifications. A bronze plaque now stands at the street corner where he was stopped. Not every uniform comes with a spotlight, but every act of service leaves a legacy. Harold kept driving that same truck and still fixed ramps. But now when people saw him, they didn't look through him. They stepped aside with respect. One of the officers visited him weeks later. I'm sorry, sir. Truly. Harold poured him coffee. You learn from it, or someone else pays next time. And from that day on, the officer made sure every rookie in that department read Harold's file before touching a badge. The transformation rippled outward from that corner. Within days, the video had been viewed 8 million times. Veterans groups rallied, sharing stories of similar treatment. Hashtag Know Who You Stop began trending. Harold, as usual, avoided the spotlight. He continued his quiet work, building his 23rd wheelchair ramp that summer for a Gulf War veteran. The younger officer, Brian Keller, didn't just apologize and disappear. He began volunteering at the VFW Hall on weekends. At first, the veterans eyed him suspiciously, the cop who disrespected one of their own. But Harold's acceptance gradually opened doors. "Why did you really come back?" Harold asked him one evening as they repaired a leaking roof at the hall. "Because I realized I knew nothing about the people I swore to protect," Brian admitted. 4 years on the force and I never once visited this place." The sheriff implemented a new training program, recognition and respect, veterans in our community. Harold reluctantly agreed to speak at the first session, where he said just 11 words: "Service doesn't end with the uniform, neither should the respect for it." General Phillips returned 3 months later, this time without ceremony or uniform. He and Harold sat on the porch of Harold's modest home, sharing whiskey and watching fireflies. "You turned it around, Harold, like always." Harold shook his head. "They turned it around themselves. All they needed was a mirror. The truck still rattles down Main Street every morning. Still carries lumber, tools, and occasionally a flag-draped coffin when a veteran passes with no family to bear them to rest. But now police cruisers pull over when they see it coming, not to stop it, but to salute it. And at the police academy, every new recruit reads a laminated card with 6 words: "You never know who you're stopping." Subscribe to Steel Heart Stories if you believe true honor doesn't rust. It rides quiet until called.